Hello all, this is Steve from Game & Friends. I'm ranking each game in the Silent Hill series, from worst to best, and I'm going into detail on the elements that work and those that don't. And today, I'm talking about Silent Hill Homecoming. I find Silent Hill Homecoming and Silent Hill Downpour to be very interesting because they almost have a yin and yang relationship. I kind of think of Downpour as an indie horror movie with really grand designs and with a lot of passion behind it, but for whatever reason the whole thing just didn't come together, maybe because of budget or time constraints. Homecoming, on the other hand, I sort of view as a big budget remake of a successful horror movie. It's technically very impressive, plenty of work has clearly gone into it, and there might even be the odd spark of originality, but it is essentially playing it safe and going through the motions. I wouldn't say I'm a fan of big budget horror remakes, but I have watched an awful lot of them. That's because sometimes you want to switch your brain off and just go through the motions. That's what Silent Hill Homecoming is. A by-the-numbers Silent Hill game that doesn't make you work very hard. Almost everything in Homecoming is regurgitated from previous titles. It plays it very safe that way. A perfect example of that is this moment, which happens almost at the very beginning of the game. Having a wheelchair fall down the stairs is vaguely unsettling and a very useful way to demonstrate the game's shiny new physics engine. If this were any other horror game, I'd probably like that moment a lot. But this is Silent Hill, and as the 5th installment, it had a lot to live up to. In previous games, everything was so meticulously detailed, every single moment felt planned and significant. With that in mind, it got me thinking, what was the significance of this moment? I will happily admit that this does serve the purpose of foreshadowing. The big reveal in this game is that the main character, Alex, thinks he's been serving in the army, but it's later revealed that he's actually been in a mental institute, trying to come to terms with the death of his younger brother, Josh. The wheelchair hints at his time spent there, but I have a few issues with the way it's presented. First of all, wheelchairs at this point are standard iconography for the series. They've made sense in each particular installment, but they're about as common in Silent Hill as the mushrooms are in Super Mario. In order to prevent them from literally just being part of the furniture, the player needs to know that they're relevant. By presenting it to us in this way at the very beginning, with no context whatsoever, it just feels mechanical. For me, this is a key moment in understanding how poor a grasp the developer, Double Helix Studios, had of what it is about Silent Hill that gets under your skin. Silent Hill 3 did something very similar, but to much greater effect. Towards the end of the game, the protagonist, Heather, sees a wheelchair simply sitting at the end of an unreachable corridor. At this point of the game, we know that Heather is actually Cheryl from the first game, and if you played Silent Hill 1, you know that Cheryl represented half of the soul of Alessa Gillespie. Now this is already getting a little convoluted, so I'm not going to explain the entire backstory.
Glad to hear it.
All you need to know is that Alessa spent a lot of time as a prisoner in a horrific hospital run by the cult of Silent Hill, and the wheelchair is a relic from that time. The theme of that game is motherhood and childbirth. The cult of Silent Hill wants Heather to give birth to their god, and the wheelchair complements that fear as well. The way the wheelchair is positioned and framed means that our attention is inevitably drawn to it. There's nothing you can do but look at it. It's unsettling, and you might not even be sure why that is. Even if you don't make the connection, the fact that it doesn't do anything still raises inevitable questions in your mind. Whose wheelchair is this? What happened to them to make them unable to walk? Why is it here of all places? Compare the nuance of that scene to this. It's like comparing Mozart to a Nickelback cover band comprised only of harmonicas and hammers. At this early point of the game, you could throw literally anything down the stairs, like a toaster or a Super Nintendo, and it would have the same shallow effect and be over in seconds. They simply used a wheelchair because it's Silent Hill, and as we all know, Silent Hill has wheelchairs. I was optimistic that Double Helix Studios would do something good with the series, somewhat naively because they had no track record. They were untested and had a lot to prove. Unfortunately, that mentality doesn't really hold up with AAA games, because most developers will simply make a carbon copy to appease fans, without really understanding why anything from previous games worked.
You don't know anything about Silent Hill.
To their credit though, I have to admit I'm still very impressed with the visuals of Homecoming. They might not have really understood the game, but I'm still grateful that so much work went into the graphics and how well they still hold up. Bear in mind, this was the first Silent Hill game on a 7th generation console, so it really needed to wow players to stand out. Luckily they did a great job and managed to build the world of Silent Hill in what I think might be the most beautiful depiction ever put to screen. Most fans of the series probably have some harsh memories of this game, simply remembering how soulless it was. But I'd say it's worth revisiting and looking at just how beautiful they made the town. Credit where credit is due and all that. It certainly shows that more money was put into this installment than in previous games, but you know the old saying, more money, more problems. You can take this statement pretty literally with survival horror, because the more money people invest in a game, the more they want to show where the money went. And while that's good in terms of graphical fidelity, there's also a negative side. When more money is involved, that tends to mean big, glamorous set pieces or explosions, which are to horror what James Sunderland is to romantic comedy. At one point mid-game, there's a monster attack on a police station that feels very Dawn of the Dead, and during this time and after, you get saddled with some sassy sidekicks at random intervals. I don't know about you, but that's a blurb I'm pretty sure Silent Hill never needed on the front of its box. Another moment that always comes to mind for me is this point in the game where you enter a warehouse, only to find a bunch of Silent Hill cult members attacking you from all directions. While there weren't any machine guns or rocket launchers firing, it still made me think that the game had borrowed a little bit too much from Call of Duty. I'd like to personally issue the galaxy's biggest middle finger to whoever thought its inclusion was a good idea. This isn't the only dumb choice the game makes. A personal pet peeve of mine occurs very late in the game when this enemy from Silent Hill 2 appears. Pyramid Head, even now, is probably the most famous monster in the Silent Hill series. He takes the form of a demonic executioner and what is known in the industry as a fan favourite. In Silent Hill 2, he represented the protagonist, James Sunderland's desire to be punished for killing his wife, Mary. You could argue that he does the same job here, representing Alex's desire to be punished for killing his little brother Josh. But the evidence strongly suggests that Double Helix Studios simply included him for fan service. He isn't integral to the story, he only appears in cutscenes, and if you could see his face, I'm pretty sure he'd be winking at the camera in those scenes because they're so bloody pointless. It's a bit of a shame because, cult members and Pyramid Head aside, Homecoming has some excellent monster design. It isn't the best in the series or anything, but it is several miles ahead of Downpour, and even some of the later entries on this list in terms of fleshy monstrosities. You get some very effective intros to new monsters, and it also has one of my very favourite boss monsters that you can see here, whose name is Scarlet. Before I go any further, I should point out that while I love Scarlet's design, it's unfortunate the symbolism behind it is a little weak. The monster is supposed to represent a man named Dr. Finch's guilt over murdering his own daughter, Scarlet, who liked to play with dolls. That's pretty limp for a game so well known for symbolic representation, but I think most people would agree that the visual design is pretty outstanding and very unsettling. Taking inspiration from the concept of the uncanny, Scarlet was inspired by the look of porcelain dolls, a very popular and effective horror trope. It also moves very rapidly at times and occasionally jumps down on all fours, sort of resembling a spider. That's a lot of unsettling imagery already, but when you add the static, bloody grin on her face as well, you've got some pretty solid nightmare fuel right there. This fight more or less represents the best that Homecoming has to offer. There isn't a massive amount of creativity on display, there's not a lot that's original here, but it's effective. It shows the development team's ability to take what they know works in horror and apply it in an often efficient, but unremarkable way.